I on?
Yep, you're all set.
There we go. All right. Well, to our week two attendees, thanks a lot for coming back for week two. Just a couple minor housekeeping notes. The draft guide that we sent out, the hyperlinks did not work apparently. Just professional note when you're putting something into Adobe Acrobat, don't print to PDF, save to PDF because I guess the links extinguish if you print. So we will be posting that in about 2 weeks onto our website or less than that. But if you'd like a new version with the hyperlinks that work, just email me. We didn't want to flood people with that again, but we have figured that out. On that same note, we will be posting the recording of the two webinars along with all of our PowerPoints onto the CIRCA website. You can either just log on to the CIRCA website and see if you can find it, or we're going to post the actual link in the chat during this webinar. So these will all be there in case you want to revisit this. So nutshell today, I am going to, or Mark and Bridge Energy are going to kind of pick up where we left off last time and talk a little bit about Connecticut and the battery market, since we didn't get to that last time. And you probably as towns will see and have seen battery proposals in front of you, mostly because of the incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act, that tax credit, and along with the new Connecticut program called Energy Storage Solutions. And the batteries can provide, I think, as Mark insinuated last time, both local grid resilience and overall grid resilience benefits. It kind of does two things. And then towards the end, we're at the end after Mark introduces Bloom, who will present an actual microgrid example of from here in Connecticut and how that has worked, both in terms of resilience and town benefits. We will go into some Q&A in which we'll dig in a little bit more into not just the resilience benefits, sort of the backup generation and grid benefits of these projects, of these sort of local generation and storage projects, but the some of the financial benefits that can come to the towns from putting these projects in, which we understand is important to you all. So without further ado, I will let Mark and Bridge take over. And Mark, if you want to, at the end of yours, sort of segue and introduce Bloom, that would be great. So whenever you're ready, Mark, you might be on mute.
Apologies. Mark Sassi, VP of Energy Services with Bridge Energy. We work with a lot of municipalities in the state, and we're here to talk about batteries briefly before we get into the rest of the segment. And I wanted to emphasize that batteries are a key piece of the puzzle. It's not the only solution for overall resiliency. And there's a symbiotic relationship with a lot of the other assets, like a baseload asset. But a battery is really what we consider a reactive asset or a peak shaving asset. Different battery types. The most commercially found technology is lithium ion. They've been tested and around for a while in the marketplace, so that's going to be the most common type. There's another concept technology of flow batteries, which is picking up momentum. Flow batteries can dispatch for longer durations than a lithium ion would. However, they take up a lot of space. So like an iron flow battery, you essentially have a shipping container of salt water and iron, and that shipping container would produce the same energy as a wall-mounted lithium ion. So there's a lot of new technologies in development. Most of them are 5 to 10 years out. So primarily the focus I would think for municipalities is lithium ion. So why battery storage? It's going to save you money. Depending on the configuration, it'll provide resiliency for backup power. And the neat thing about batteries is you can make money from batteries when power prices are expensive. Power prices are expensive when the grid is really dirty. And so when you use a battery, you're both cleaning the grid and you're making money or saving money. So there's a nice relationship with how a battery is used and renewable and monetary benefits. But how does a battery work? Um, it clips the peak off your load. So the graph on the right is representative of the month of August, and each line is representative of a particular day. So in the morning, overnight, about 800 kW gets up to about 1700 kW in this example and comes back down in the battery would be programmed to dispatch right around 1500 kW in this example to shave the top off of that. So you would mitigate the demand charges and kilowatt hour charges above that line. You can have the battery charge at night. You can have it charged by a renewable asset. And typically batteries are sized to reduce this peak by about 20%, but we'll get into that a little bit more. And so this slide here is a representation of ongoing value streams. So once the battery is up and running and paid for and built, how it continues to deliver value years 1 to 10 or 15, whatever the useful life of the battery is. And what you'll notice here is that there's savings and there's revenue. So savings means that the demand charges, the delivery charges on your utility bill, and the commodity supply charges, the red and the yellow in the pie chart to the left, is savings. And then the green is revenue, where you'd be paid based on when the battery operates. And so this example is sized for about 20% of the peak, simple payback around 4 years. And this is configured as a 2-hour battery, just a quick example. But on this, what a lot of municipalities will probably hear from vendors and battery salespeople is, oh, we'll give you a free battery. You'll get the resiliency benefits, just let us put it in, and you'll end up getting demand and commodity savings. Well, there's a little bit of an inherent conflict of interest there where the people who own and operate the battery are running it to maximize the green side of the pie chart, and it could end up at the expense of your piece of the pie, right? And then the other thing too is in the state of Connecticut, with the ongoing performance incentive, really you can maximize total cash value or net present value of a battery by maximizing this green piece. So we always say before you engage with a developer, you should really try and understand what the value streams and implications of how the deal is structured. So separate from the ongoing performance revenue, in the state of Connecticut, there is an upfront rebate. This upfront rebate is limited space. It's first come, first serve. We're already in tranche 2. It was supposed to be opened next year. And then in the springtime, they ended up opening it earlier. We've got about 4.4 megawatts out of the 100 megawatts allotted to this tranche subscribed already. This is probably going to fill up in 3 to 6 months. And while this upfront rebate is capped at 50% of the project cost, when you do the math, it generally only gets to like 10 to 20%. But it's important to note because that 10 to 20% upfront rebate does get stacked on the federal ITC benefit. So if you're getting 30% ITC benefit, the 10 to 20% is additional to that. So you could end up having a battery half paid for before it even starts getting into its first year of operation. So municipality considerations, it's a new technology rolled out in the municipal space in the state of Connecticut. We've seen a lot of examples in other states, and those states have potentially developed universal fire code. Right now in Connecticut, it's a town by town basis. So it's an important consideration to loop in those stakeholders early. We talked about operational conflicts of interest depending on the ownership structure and who owns what, and a few other considerations. I don't think we need to go through each of them, but what I would emphasize for batteries, similar to fuel cells, is you really want to understand what the potential value streams are before you structure a contract and do your homework. So this last slide, for the energy nerds out there, you may like this one. If you're not an energy nerd, just hang with me for a little bit. This is what we call an annual load duration curve. So on the bottom, this is the percent of the time that a particular meter is using a certain level of power. And then on the left here is the level of power. So 10% of the time, for this example, this meter is using, let's call it 1100 kW or more. And so what I did was I put a fuel, first we put as much solar as we could on the rooftop system, on the rooftop. And in most places, solar rooftop only really displaces about 10% of annual volume. So we go from this blue line here of the original consumption down to this black line with solar considered. And after we factor in what the solar did, you can size the fuel cell in the state of Connecticut to target ultimately zero volumetric charges because of how Connecticut does the import-export accounting. The one thing I'll note is while the total volume charges can be zero, you would still have to pay for demand charges for this red territory. But that's really where a battery can thrive. So in this case, what we're saying is we're going to put in a battery 1.5 times the peak demand, which is the maximum that you can put in under the new battery program guidelines. So 2000 kW, which is off the charts here, and help reduce the red demand that the fuel cell doesn't really cover. So once you have the battery, the fuel cell, and the solar, it's still only going to provide pure resiliency 75% of the days. So in this case, what we would say is you may need like 1,000 megawatt generator to still supplement that mix. So ultimately, when you look at the big picture puzzle, it's not just one type of asset. A battery is a key component to it, but you really need to get a sense of what you're trying to accomplish, what the stakeholders are trying to achieve, and try and fit some of the puzzle pieces together. You don't have to complete the puzzle all at once. You can do a battery and then, different assets separately, but you should always keep that end picture in mind, even if you do the tiered approach. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Mike Recher. Mike is a senior systems engineer with Bloom Energy, and Bloom is a major fuel cell company provider with projects across the state and other municipalities.
Great, thanks, Mark. All right, so I'm going to briefly cover, obviously, just quick background on Bloom Energy, the technology, just so everyone's kind of aware of the technology that we offer. And then obviously I'd like to discuss the Hartford microgrid case study from a high level and some of the benefits, the overview, and how it went down. If you're not familiar with Bloom, so Bloom is
Hey,
a menu.
Mike, would you be able to expand your PowerPoint to presentation mode?
I'm sorry, you're not seeing it as presentation mode right now?
We're not. You may have it on a different screen or sharing a different screen.
I apologize for that.
No worries.
Another dot.
The way you have it now is actually we can view it. We can just see your slides on the side, but not really.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if that's okay, I'll.
This is fine. Yeah.
Let me just move some of these notes out of the way now.
Yeah. This
Apologies
what
for
you
that.
have now is fine.
All right, we'll go with that for now. I don't want to hold up the presentation here. So brief background. So Bloom's been around for about 20 years now. We're a global company. We do our manufacturing of the actual fuel cell technology in San Jose, California, and final assembly in Newark, Delaware, actually at the University of Delaware. Just about over $1 billion of revenue last year. So as a technology, as a company, we've been growing a lot since the early days. Right now we're approaching almost a gigawatt of installed base. So it's a program and a company that's been growing substantially over the years, and just over the past few years, it's been probably more on the exponential side of the growth curve for us. So the background really, as far as what we do and what we offer, a solid oxide fuel cell platform. We're going to talk about the Connecticut, the Hartford microgrid, but in terms of the mix of how the platform works, it's very flexible. So it can be used as an electrolyzer and other applications for combined heat and power, carbon capture, et cetera. We're actually putting these things on boats now too as well, if you can believe it. So it's got a lot of flexibility in the platform itself, but the core technology is a solid oxide fuel cell, which I'm going to cover very briefly, just to make sure we're all on the same page as to what we are talking about with this City of Hartford microgrid. So the core basics behind this is the fuel cell itself is very similar to a battery. You've got an anode and a cathode, and you have an electrolyte. So actually what I'm holding in my hand right now is a sort of a paper representation of what that fuel cell looks like size-wise. Each one of these fuel cells can power about a typical household light bulb. And what happens is we take fuel, which in this case, or in most cases, is natural gas, could be hydrogen or other sources, but basically methane is the most available fuel source right now. So that comprises, it's comprised of CH4, carbon, 4 hydrogens. We pass that over the anode side of the fuel cell. And on the cathode side, we basically pass air, or in our case, we extract the oxygen from that air. And what happens is that creates an electrochemical reaction. We steal the electricity from that reaction, use that to produce power for the site, and then we produce heat and a little bit of CO2. In general, depending on where the fuel cell is installed throughout the country, anywhere from a 20% to 50% reduction in CO2 compared to the local marginal generator emitters in the utility that we're looking at, as well as basically a 99.9%, almost 100% reduction in the NOx and the SOx and the particulate matter that would normally be generated as part of a combustion process are removed, because obviously we're not combusting any fuel in our case. The actual platform itself, as I mentioned, that fuel cell, we start with that. What we do is we actually stack those up into something that looks like almost like the size of a big brick in your hands. 2 of those stacks or bricks could probably power the typical American home. And then what we do is we take those and we stack them up even more, and we create what's known as a power module. Each one of those power modules is about 55 kilowatts today. When I first started at the company, we were down around 30, 35 kilowatts. And prior to that time, I think we started around 5 kilowatts. So every year as the company has progressed, that the density of that footprint has increased, very similar to like the Moore's law of energy, if you were to make a comparison. The actual energy server, we refer to it as, instead of a fuel cell, we call it an energy server. The footprint itself, it's very modular. So we take those power modules and we kind of stack them up side by side, very similar to like a Lego brick installation, right? We can wrap around corners. We can go into all kinds of different shapes and spread them out throughout the site in a way that makes sense. But the example you're looking at right now could fit into a typical parking space, and that's about 300 kilowatts that you're looking at right there in the space of a parking lot or a parking space, excuse me. So just to kind of give you an idea of the energy density we're talking about, that's what you're working with when you're looking at our fuel cell technology. And obviously we can scale those up. So basically you take those 300 kilowatt blocks and you scale them up to whatever size installation makes sense. Here's just a couple of different examples to kind of wrap your head around what this could look like or how it looks. Our largest installation in the US is 28 megawatts with Delmarva, the utility. That's a ground-based installation, but we do have the ability to actually stack these as well, which allows us to obviously go vertical, reduce our footprint, and also do cool things like combined heat and power applications as well, where we can harness even more efficiency out of the fuel cell if we needed to. One thing I should have mentioned is the fuel cell itself. Normally starting, we don't actually need to have a combined heat and power application, as we have a very high starting efficiency of around 65%. So, most of our projects will forego the CHP, but if there is a customer that needs the heat, we can bring that efficiency up to about 80, 85%, depending on the application. That is a possibility. So I want to run through very briefly the microgrid capabilities. This is very high level. And then we can get into the Connecticut example. Really just three different offerings, right? Obviously, what you would expect, primary power, that's very similar to solar, where we interact with the utility. We essentially provide kilowatt hours to the customer. In some cases, we may export some energy if we exceed the load at the site. In other cases, there'll be additional utility draw to the customer, depending on where that load curve is, as Matt had mentioned before. And then the two different examples of microgrid offerings that Bloom provides. The easiest way to kind of summarize this is if you think about, if you have a UPS on site or if you don't, it's very similar in terms of what you would get out of these two scenarios. The basic Bloom microgrid is an open transition microgrid, meaning there would be an outage from the utility. Bloom would disconnect from the utility as inverters, and then we would reconnect during a short period of time, long enough for sensitive loads that would normally need UPS quality power. Those loads would not see that power, and then we would reconnect. So it's similar to like an ATS or automatic transfer switch timing or a generator coming online. There's a brief outage at the site. If there's loads at the site that can handle that outage, then this is the typical offering. And then a more advanced version of that microgrid offering is a scenario where all the loads are on the fuel cell all the time, and the utility is sort of there as a backup, right? So if there ever is an outage, there really is no transition of equipment swinging over. There is no automatic transfer switch or breakers or anything like that needs to transition over, as the loads won't see an outage during the utility outage. So it allows those loads to continue operating as long as there's the fuel cell on-site operating as well. So those are the three examples of kind of the base fuel cell offerings that Bloom provides as a platform for power generation on site. And obviously the microgrid has, these are two basic examples of the microgrid. There's a lot of different ways we could take that and combine that with other technologies, including batteries and solar. But I wanted to just give the background on, what Bloom provides as a base offering. So there's kind of an easy understanding as to what we offer. So the City of Hartford case study, this was a great project for Bloom. You can kind of see in the picture here right off the road, you've got the school in the background. And then in this side yard right here, you can see the actual installation of the fuel cells. That's the darker gray boxes there. And then right behind that, you have the ancillary electrical gear and switches that are needed to tie into the building, as well as other parts of the microgrid, which I will cover here. So, following Exelon's investment in the Bloom Project Fund 4, the companies, we jointly pursued customer opportunities, those, including those requiring complex microgrid solutions. So in 2017, the City of Hartford, Constellation, and Bloom completed a fuel cell microgrid in the city's Parkville neighborhood. And this 800 kilowatt microgrid system generates 100% of the electricity for Hartford's Parkville Elementary School, their Dwight Branch Library. They've got the Parkville Senior Center and Charter Oak Health Center. Additionally, it also serves the gas station and the supermarket. And this is both during normal operations as well as during utility outages. They can provide power to those loads. So this helped strengthen, obviously, Hartford's energy infrastructure, but also allowed them to reduce costs. Constellation was a partner that provided all the EPC, engineering, procurement, construction services, as well as operating the microgrid system. And the city of Hartford, they purchased the electricity generated at or below current market rates via a 15-year customer service agreement, very similar to like a power purchase agreement. And this was Connecticut's first project that was developed through a public-private effort, and one of the first implemented through the Department of Energy Environmental Protection, Connecticut's microgrid grant program. So it's definitely a pretty cool opportunity. A lot of these programs actually came out after Hurricane Sandy had hit the Northeast, and I'm not entirely certain, but I believe this was probably one of those microgrid offerings or entities that kind of popped up after the years of study on trying to improve and increase resiliency in these neighborhoods after that storm had hit. So if you were to look at the city of Hartford area where the fuel cells, I've kind of circled them in green there. The way it's set up today, you've got the fuel cells on the bottom in the red there. You've got the school that's part of this microgrid, the community center in green, the library. And then across the street, we also have a grocery store and a gas station. So really, when you think about it, this microgrid does provide that, that beacon, that lighthouse in the middle of an outage where, in the Northeast could be a lot of things. It could be a hurricane. It could be a really bad snowstorm or an ice storm. We get, nor'easters all throughout the fall there where things can get knocked out. A number of things can bring down utility power for whatever reasons, obviously, as we're all aware these days. So as a community center, really, this allows the core of the area to have, important services available, even during an outage, so that people can, still go get the bread and the milk and fill up their vehicles. And then obviously you've got buildings here that are important to the community during an outage. So that was part of why this was designed this way and obviously provided those benefits. A couple of key items to kind of represent here. This was an 800 kilowatt installation. So this is a smaller offering in terms of what we talked about or what I represented earlier in the diagrams. So each one of these fuel cells, or as we refer to them, energy servers, is 200 kilowatts. So you actually have 4 in these 2 different rows here. It's 200 and 200 back to back, and then another 200 and 200 back to back. As I mentioned earlier, this is, it's flexible. We run from 100, 150 kilowatts up to 325 kilowatts, depending on the arrangement. And then we have some ancillary equipment associated with the microgrid as well. On the bottom here, we've got some ultra capacitors that allow us to carry load, and then some other switches. We've got a static transfer switch assembly building inside here that you can actually walk inside. It's weather protected, and then some of the ancillary switchgear equipment. So as I did mention, it's a 15-year power purchase agreement. It's a smaller footprint, so really dense footprint just onto the side of the building that wasn't really being utilized. As far as stats, this actually did represent a 40% reduction in CO2 compared to the local utilities marginal emitters that are the ones that typically turn online when there's not enough solar or other assets to provide power to the community during peak usage. No SOx and NOx emissions, obviously, it's a good thing for the community as well. So that baseload power is 24/7, 365, and it provides, grid outage, basically replaces the utility during a grid outage for all those core services. And one of the good things about this was, as well, all the electrical was run underground, so you didn't have a bevy of additional utility poles running through the community. That's basically the summary of the city of Hartford there. I'll pause now and see if we maybe want to get into some other topics or questions.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate it. Yeah, just so folks know, if you want to ask specific questions, if you could put them in the chat room, one of the Unfortunately, one of the deficiencies we found out with WebEx is when it's in webinar mode, we can't actually open the room up and see you all. But we will entertain questions in the chat box as we go. But we did receive a bunch for our panelists that I'll start off with. And I guess on the fuel cell note, and this I guess goes to either Mark or Mike. It's the incentives, we talk a lot about it. We're dealing with, our focus at CIRCA is municipalities. So municipalities have budget concerns. And the money aspect of this is important. And it's fairly, I think a lot of municipalities understand now the economics with we call a plain vanilla solar project. You either get a lease payment, and if you happen to be in the net metering world, you get, the market is roughly 10% off of your electric bill. I know it's more complicated than that, but the economics are fairly stabilized at this point in the market. With fuel cells, what we see the resiliency benefits and the environmental benefits, but what are some of the economic benefits that a town could expect from putting a fuel cell in? Is it much cheaper power you're selling the town than Eversource, and is there a lease payment, and what are some of the aspects of that a town can expect, without giving away specifics that go to your particular model?
Mike, I can start and then pass off to you.
Sure.
For any energy asset, typically if you purchase the system, you're going to get a better financial return, albeit that comes with operational risks and a lot of other things. So, there's the risk return is pretty clear in a lot of energy projects. With the IRA passing to give nonprofits the direct pay benefit, we've seen that gap between buying and PPA or lease options close. Given the leverage that nonprofits now have. Specific to the Parkville microgrid, we look at a couple things. One is budgetary savings. So what was the net impact versus the baseline year? And then we also look at avoided market cost, which is a little bit more of a hypothetical number. For the City of Hartford Parkville microgrid, they received a budgetary savings of just over $20,000 a year, and the baseline year was 2020 when power was pretty cheap. So the avoided market costs are significantly higher than that. I think rule of thumb, and Mike, you may cringe when I put this out there, but typically we see fuel cells that make sense. So excluding all the other fuel cells that don't make sense, at least 20,000 annual savings per 100 kW is just probably a conservative ballpark where it does make a lot of sense. Yeah.
And do you again, I'm just sort of piggybacking on this based on the questions I received. Is this a technology that a small town theoretically could manage on its own, and with the direct pay? So we now want to own the fuel cell, and what type of outsourcing is there for help with O&M and maintenance and operations and things like that in the market today?
Yeah, I can cover that a little bit, Mark, and then if there's anything you want to add on that. So in general, what it comes down to with the fuel cells, a couple of things. When we actually look to install and operate the fuel cells, you technically could purchase these CapEx deal. Most of the time, the entities that do that are sitting on a pretty large pile of cash. So think of like the Apples and the Googles of the world, where they're looking to do something with their money. If we're dealing with municipalities, a lot of times it's, there's maybe not that pile of cash sitting around, right? And you're also looking to potentially monetize incentives, et cetera. So, generally speaking, power purchase agreements are what we would normally look to do. And in those arrangements, whether it's PPA or a CapEx financial vehicle, Bloom Energy provides the actual servicing and operation of these fuel cells. So as part of that, if you think about the breakdown of what it costs per kilowatt hour to generate an electron at the site for that customer. There's a couple of components to that, right? You've got the cost of the actual fuel cell equipment. You've got the cost of the installation, but then you're also going to have the cost of ongoing operations and maintenance and the cost of the fuel. So, when we do actually run a financial model for whoever the customer may be, we need to break down each one of those components to explain, what are the costs associated with that over however many years we're looking at during the life of the project. What's the payback, from year 0 to the end of the program? What does it look like if there's a change in electricity costs, rates, T&D rates, generation rates, and how does that impact the model in either direction? And also, what is the impact if there's a change in the cost of gas? A lot of customers generally like to understand that a little bit more in detail, and we go through all of that to help provide some more understanding of what that means. But when it comes to operating and maintaining these systems, they're run 100% of the time and maintained and operated by Bloom Energy. So any of the service personnel that need to actually be on site are Bloom Energy staff, and then we remotely monitor these 24/7, 365 through redundant control centers in the U.S. as well as internationally, and we can see basically what's going down up to each individual fuel cell inside every single one of those boxes. Do predictive maintenance, so if there's an issue that comes up before an actual component may fail, we can actually take a look at that. Say if there's a voltage on a fan that maybe looks like it's not necessarily in the ideal position, we can go out there and proactively replace it, et cetera. So those are the components that would be included typically in most of our installations.
I'll add 2 quick things as well. Resiliency comes at a premium. So if resiliency wasn't a primary goal, then your financial benefit would go up. There's just an inverse relationship with that. And then also for fuel cells, they have a lot better uptime in the marketplace than a cogen or a turbine or an engine. So from the end user's perspective of a municipality, these are much more low maintenance as far as, potential, issues and runtime.
Yeah, and we always, thinking about it from an overall grid resiliency perspective, again, it's locally produced generation that doesn't need to wait on long, expensive transmission lines to be constructed. Some of the issues we're seeing around here and out west, where they're trying to figure out how to tie new sources of generation like big wind and solar to load, and in the construction of those lines is often the impediment. And with fuel cells and some of these other local generation products, you can avoid that and do it now. And one other note too, for the next question, my supervisor, who I'll make fun of, always said, you should do this in time for budget season with towns. And the way Mike is describing it and the way I describe it is these aren't going to cost you anything if you choose not to take the direct pay, but you outsource to a developer after a process. These are often at no cost to the towns. So keep that in mind also, generally speaking, for all of these technologies. Now, one more on fuel cells, hopefully a simple one. One needs a natural gas service line in the area or to the building, correct, to think about a fuel cell, or is it possible to start thinking about green hydrogen and fuel cells in 2023 where you don't need natural gas?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'll kind of answer the beginning of that, and if Matt has anything to add, for sure. Hydrogen is absolutely the word of the year, or the word of, I guess, maybe the past couple of years. Everyone loves the word, and the advancement of hydrogen is going to be critical to decarbonize major sectors of the economy and industry. But we're just not quite there yet. So the hydrogen molecule it's still relatively expensive to generate and relatively expensive to transport and store. There's a lot of incentives out there to kind of advance that and move that forward, and Bloom is obviously a part of that on both ends of generation and actually utilizing that hydrogen molecule. But today it's just not quite there, and it's going to take some time to actually catch up to that point. If and when the time comes where it's cost effective to transport and utilize that hydrogen molecule on site, our fuel cells today can, without any changes, can actually handle up to 20 to 30% of that hydrogen. With minimal changes, we can handle up to 50%. And then we have a fully 100% hydrogen fuel cell available today if the customer or the end user had that hydrogen on site or had a way to get it on site. Generally speaking, from what I've heard, most gas utilities can probably handle around 15 to 20% hydrogen injected into their pipeline before you're going to have major issues. It's a different molecule, different size. You're going to have all kinds of issues with leakage, et cetera. So until industry catches up to the goals of the future, it's going to take some time to get there. But at least the good news is from the Bloom side, we're able to start getting in there today, local on-site generation, start decarbonizing or reducing carbon right away. And then over time, a lot of our customers can transition as these other sources of fuel become available. But certainly, if there is a source of readily available hydrogen available today, we certainly can use that as a source of power for a customer.
So from the gas side as well, you don't just need gas pipe, you need high pressure gas. You used to be able to go online and look that up, but the past couple decades, they've been limiting that information. So you'd need to reach out to your gas rep with a specific address. The hydrogen is probably 5 years out from potential commercial delivery. If it's something that you'd want your asset to be flexible consideration in the future, it's important to mention that early in the process because there's extra parts and valves. And I mean, Mike, again, you're probably cringing, but there's things that you can plan for that makes that compatibility easier in the future.
Yeah, and that's a general theme too. We try to pass along is that whatever you're doing, plan for the future. If you're just doing a solar project and you're not ready for that extra battery component, there are specific types of inverters and other equipment that can take batteries versus those that can't. And think about if you've got a medium or high voltage electrical team on site putting in the wires, or there will be on site. Think about looking at EV charging possibilities if it's a high traffic area. You can really take advantage of not just the stacking, but some of the efficiencies out there to kind of do all of this. Well, Amy, if you're still there, we're not leaving the demand side off. One of the questions that came up was, there's all these great upfront incentives, so towns don't need to spend money on fuel cells and solar and batteries. And the question came up whether the same rings true for the energy efficiency model, whether towns can make their buildings more energy efficient without spending money out front, whether those incentives have been dumped in front of the energy efficiency installers and construction folks so that then they can do it at the expense of themselves and they get a longer payback so the towns don't have to come out of pocket. Is that something that you're seeing in the energy efficiency world, or is it still requiring the building owner to expend some money up front?
So I'm sure Bridge Energy can talk about this too, but we're kind of lucky in Connecticut. There's lots of financial programs to help municipalities and schools finance their programs so that they're not out of money. They don't have to pay out of pocket up front. The Energize CT programs have, in some cases, you can do on-bill financing so that you don't have any money up front. And usually they don't do the on-bill financing unless your savings are more than the energy savings and cost reductions are more than what you're paying for the project. And so, that's one great program in the state. And there are, rules and some rules and restrictions on that. There's limits or caps of, how much money a particular municipality can get in a year. But you should definitely, reach out to your Eversource or, UI, depending upon which part of Connecticut you're in. You should make sure that you're town leaders are connected with the reps, the representatives from there, because they can help you with the incentives and rebates. Most of the energy services providers and contractors who work closely with the utility companies and ICT, you know, they're also familiar with all of the incentives and rebate programs, and they can help you. Knowing your financial situation can help you determine if you're going to qualify, for how much, you know, what are good ways to finance the program. And so places like Bridge and other energy services providers also work pretty closely with Eversource UI and ICT to figure out and know what those incentives are. You know, there's also, you know, the other thing I've seen in several towns that we've worked with at Smart Building CT is some towns are doing performance contracting. And so those agreements, you know, basically you enter into, a lot of the towns are doing them. It's a great way to achieve energy efficiency, you know, citywide. So there's some towns that have implemented performance contracting on 15 to 20 buildings, you know, everything from lighting to upgrades of energy systems, renewables, and that's a great way to kind of do a comprehensive package. And then over a certain number of years, as you save money, that company is taking, the only downside is that company's taking a little bit of a piece of it, but the benefits of it is that usually those measures are highly investigated. You know, there's a good confidence that the paybacks and the incentives are going to be there to pay back, and it's a good way to do large scale projects across the town. And you know, CT Green Bank also offers, you know, great financing for a lot of the green and renewables. And I'll probably pass to Mark and the folks at Bridge and see if you guys want to add in, you know, additional knowledge that you have about some of the other financing programs that are out there for towns for
Yeah, I
energy
think you
efficiency
covered
in their
it very
buildings.
well. Like any energy project, you know, on one end of the spectrum, it's paying for it yourself. On the other end, it's having somebody else pay for it. And there's a trade-off to financial implications and risk in both those scenarios. But for efficiency, there's certainly a lot of energy service agreements or shared savings agreements that are available in the marketplace. I would just emphasize one thing and a call to action on another is make sure you understand who's at risk for the success of getting rebates and grants when you're comparing different options that you calculate and quantify that rebate risk. And then secondly, a lot of the rebates and grants available don't last forever. So whether it's lighting, you know, other efficiency stuff, if you need to do it, you should do it as soon as possible because the rates go down over time or they completely go away over time as new technology and efficient technology, you know, the future is going to end up being the expectation today. And programs aren't designed for what you're expected to have, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and that goes true too. And generally speaking, in the incentive world, the sooner the better, as the programs do run out, and the benefits usually go down pretty quickly over time. And they usually go down faster than the cost of the equipment is going down. And mostly that's just due to increased competition and others coming into the market. So, you know, this is one of the reasons we started the initiative, was because now is a good time with the federal and state incentives out there. They're pretty vibrant right now, but all right, I got an easy one to sort of wrap it up. I know everyone's probably anxious to get to lunch, but so this is probably another Mark question. Not to put you on the spot, Mark, but I'm going to paraphrase this because I think I understand the question. If I had I'll make something up. If I had a senior center in town with air conditioning and it used 2 million kilowatt hours over the course of a year, and I put in a battery that could dispatch 2 million kilowatt hours, and the power went out and the batteries clicked on, how many days or weeks am I going to continue to operate the senior center? And this is a question that was the original question had to do with why wouldn't I just put in a backup natural gas generator? Oh, you're on mute.
about 2 million kilowatt hours with a perfectly flat load would have a demand of 230, but let's say peak demand of about 600 kW. So you'd probably, for 2 hours of resiliency, need a 1.2 megawatt hour battery. And so, the big thing with batteries
Fully
versus
dispatching to cover the entire building, including AC, all of that. How long would that 1.2 battery last?
2 hours, right?
Okay.
So if you, and then this is where it gets really expensive, and then there's caps on the actual Connecticut program. So if your peak demand for that site is 600 kW, you're not only limited by what the grid can take, but the program rule says that you can only put in a battery of 900, 1.5 times your peak demand. So ultimately, if you want more longer term resiliency, then you would need a different type of asset.
So the nutshell is, even if the program allowed it, given the limitations in technology right now, the best way to get more capacity would be just to simply put in bigger batteries or daisy chain more batteries on top of each other to get days, if not maybe weeks of backup, which might not be financially realistic.
The workaround to the sizing cap would be to put in a flow battery, which would give you 6 to 12 hours for the same kind of sizing, but you need a lot of space for that if you want to give up a parking lot.
So as you indicated, much of the incentive and reason for towns to consider batteries wouldn't necessarily be for what, the classic definition of resiliency, meaning we want to be resilient in the case of a storm and have good backup power, but more or grid resiliency in the sense that we can use the battery to eliminate peak usage, drop cap tag and other demand charges on your bill, be financially intelligent, but also do good things for the overall grid during stress times like midsummer 2 to 8, things like that. Those are the primary motivators for batteries right now, as opposed to 5 days of backup power like we needed a couple summers ago.
Yeah, pure customer resiliency, it's a piece of the puzzle. But every customer that has a battery is doing their part to make the grid less carbon intensive during strained times, and also just make the grid more reliable during those high demand events on a state level, utility distribution level, and then an ISO New England level.
Great. Well, very helpful. Well, I think we are out of time, so I appreciate all the panelists, and thank you very much, Amy, Mark, Mike, and everybody, and Nicole and Luann. And thank you to the participants. You know how to reach us. We will post the PowerPoints with everyone's contact information on there, and suggestions on the guide and moving forward are always welcome. Thank you very much.